you, SideFX and FMX, for having us here today. It's always great to be presenting to so many talented artists from within the visual effects community. And it's a privilege to be here today, where we will be presenting our CFX workflows on Disney's The Boy and the Octopus short film, which was streamed over Disney Plus over the Christmas 2024 period. I'm hoping some people here got to see it, and we loved working on it. It was really exciting for us. We are from Untold Studios, and we were set up by the Mills founding team. We were founded by the Mills London office leadership team back in 2018. And since then, we have been awarded and recognized for Emmys, Grammys, VESs, BAFTAs, and the most recent one was BAFTA for The Rings of Power, Season 2. In 2018, we were 16 people. Today, we are close to 500. We are in London, Mumbai, Toronto, New York, and LA. My name's Amaan Akram. I'm CTO at Untold Studios. I've got 25 plus years of visual effects and CG. I guess I should stop counting now. It's been quite a long time. And I've spent a significant chunk of that time over at the Mill, MPC Film, Untold Studios, and I've been in creative and technology leadership positions. I come from an artist background, so I worked as a generalist, an effects artist, a lighting and rendering artist, software developer, because I've got a background in computer science, and as CTO, I look after our workflows and how they can be most optimal in terms of the number of projects we're doing concurrently. And I will work across R&D and software development, work with pipeline teams, work with talented individuals who are heading up departments or supervising specific types of, with chunks of work within our studio. Andrea?
Over to me. Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Lacedelli. I am the CFX Supervisor in Untold Studios. And I joined the studio about 2 years ago and have 7 years of experience, not as many as Amaan.
I'm old.
Well, yeah, I'm getting there. My experience ranges from being a generalist over the years. I also did render wrangling, crowd artist, and last but not least, character effects, which I love. During my time in Untold, I focused mostly in developing tools and workflows for the department, as well as delivering projects across advert, episodic, and films. And talking about creatures, why don't we take a look at the creature showreel that we prepared for this? Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We like to describe ourselves as a technology-driven studio fueled by artistry. And what I mean by that is there are various aspects to look at this. And one of them is we were the first studio to be entirely based in the cloud. That's not just having remote workstations, that's everything. That's storage, that's render farm, that's artist workstations, shot grid, software installs, everything is up in the cloud. And we normally do a whole talk on this subject, but it's really a key enabler for us, and it's one of our key selling points when we go and talk to clients. It also allows us to access the best talent regardless of where they are. So we're not limited by geographical location. And you see that represented in our reel. We're very proud of the work that we've done. because we can work with so many talented individuals. We work across live action, so we will do music videos, we will do design and motion graphics. We work across visual effects. Hopefully there are some recognizable projects over there. And we also do special projects like virtual production. So you're seeing a Chemical Brothers Chemical Brothers music video, live again, top right. And I think at this point, I hand over to Andrea for the bulk of the talk.
That's all mine now.
Yeah.
Cool. So what is like to work in CFX Untold Studios? If you ask me, I would say it's really exciting. We are known for our creature work, and clients come to us with crazy ideas that we try and achieve. I mean, an eagle being ridden by Sylvester Stallone to begin with is really weird. Cow on a motorbike, octopus on people's heads, a walrus on a boat, and the list goes on. So we always have to think outside the box. And I mean, what allows us to do this is Houdini. So why do we use Houdini per se? We use it across the studio, not just in simulation, but also lighting, rendering, Lookdev, and groom, which allows us to really make a cross-department workflow super easy. And on top of that, it allows us to be very flexible, so we can design workflows and prototypes really quickly. Last but not least, of course, we have a close relationship with side effects. Some of them are here as well. So this really allows us to tap into its full potential. So with that said, just a quick thank you to many, many people, some listed here, and many more working behind the scenes to help us achieve our goals. So today's talk, Blub Blub, this little octopus. Before we dive into how we came up to bring this to life, we're going to show you a bit of the making of itself, and then at the end, the full advert. Thank you. So, to give a bit of an insight before we begin, it was a 4-minute short movie, and with about 6 months from concept to delivery, which was a challenge of its own, and about 7 assets, one of them being the clear cut, which was a whole thing on its own as well. We had over 100 shots to work on, and over the lifespan of the project, more than 80 people worked on it, that including production, pipeline technology, artists, and so on. So what were the challenges we started to face and started asking ourselves? One of them was, how do we have a groom and a hat interacting with an octopus? How does that look like? And then, most importantly, how do we preserve the animation performance, but also simulate on top? On top of that, when we began our work, the assets were not locked, so we had to find a way to have a procedural workflow, non-destructive. And due to the short schedule, we had to find a way to make it as fast as possible. Which brings us to the story behind him, Blub Blub. So we had about 3 weeks to develop mostly everything that we needed for the show. Not much time, if you ask me. So we started exploring all the ideas we had about what worked and what didn't. So we started having quite some fun throwing the octopus around, having it crawl on the head or squash on glasses. So thanks to this early stage, we began with the foundations of our actual setup. So we begin with the prepping animation and split the setup, the presentation into 3 sections to make it a bit simpler. We begin with the preparation of the assets. So we have here the prep stage, the simulation, and the export stage. Once we go into our import, we just gather our animation cache from the department, and we just store a few attributes that are needed throughout the shots themselves. Before we move any forward, we have to make our own pre-rolls, because in Untold we make pre-rolls in CFX. So thanks to some point data from rigging, we generate a KineFX skeleton, and then are able to produce our own pre-rolls, and we can modify it as much as we need. Once we cache that out, the next step for us would be to actually apply or fix intersections from animation. The reasons for this was to prevent back and forth between departments. So through this network, we were able to decide how much to push in and effectively create an intersections, or vice versa, if it was too strong. This was because at the end of the day, we need to have some volume to squash and feel it like alive. So the main goal was literally that. And we had full control over each individual tentacle, over the time frame and individual position. Once we're happy with all that, we will simply cache that out and move on to our next stage, which is the core and the tet mesh. The tet mesh is nothing but a tetrahedral mesh, so it's not hollow, it's a full geometry that we use to simulate. So we begin our preparation by making procedural groups, again, due to the fact that the asset was not locked. So we set up a lot of things that are needed later on the line. And right after that, we are simply creating our simulation geometry through remesh, BDB, and tet conform. As you'll be able to see, it's not hollow, and it has also a custom resolution at the lower body, thanks to these scatter points, to allow optimization, so we only add data where we need it. Before we move on to the core, we were just storing as well a few class attributes needed for the wrapping stage, so that the capture would work nicely, especially on the lower part. But the most important part of the asset was actually the core. This is, we took inspiration from the tissue workflow of side effects, but it's a stripped down version, a bit lighter, because we didn't need many features. So we shrunk down the model itself and added a few attributes to control this volume of the tentacles or the head. And through some metaballs and magnets, very old school, we were pushing in and out the head sack to create the volume that would be driving the animation from the inside out. Changing that would allow us to make it stiffer, softer, bouncier, and that would really dictate the emotions that it would transmit to the viewer. So once we were happy with that, we would simply point deform it and make it move. Before we enter simulation itself, we had to create a few more groups for the simulation itself, like pin, disable, and other properties needed down the line. So done all that, we would simply place the asset in our first frame of the shot with our pre-roll, and also wrap it and deform it. Nice. This brings us to simulation. So again, with the idea of optimization, we had to be very cautious about how expensive that was in terms of time. And we begin with our attributes, and the goal was to really give a very easy interface to the user. So through procedural groups again, we selected all the regions that we were interested in to give control to the CFX artist. So through simply having those groups, they convert to attributes, and then through simple sliders, the CFX artist will be able to dictate how stretchy or how heavy, how much dampening each single section has. So that it would be very easy for them to be like, hey, I want the head sack to be softer. And so just one slider, and that's about it. So we had full control over this. And it was a key point for us, again, to have the right emotions come across to the viewer, given that there is no speech in the whole advert. Right before we enter simulation, we also added one extra feature, which was a sucker attraction. So what we wanted to do was effectively have it act as a real octopus and glue to the boy's head. So through this interface, we were able to dictate which tentacles and where and how much they would snap onto the boy's head. This was fully customizable and controllable over time as well. It would understand if in the animation the tentacles lifting willingly from the boy's head so that it would disable the property. And then we enter the simulation, which is a tet mesh, tet stretch constraint, being multiplied in vex right after with those very same values we just showed. We had an option to do a pin to animation from inside out, but at the end we went with non-touch constraints because it didn't have to compute the input geometry. It was a lot lighter. So as you can see, we have our core inside and everything is being attached. So it's almost fully simulated, even the inside. And then we have our attraction constraints for the boy's head. Once we simulate, we simply cast it out and apply a couple of postfixes that I'm not covering, but generally speaking, they're delta mesh, attribute blur, sometimes soft transforms as we need. And that's our final simulation. And you can see how those lower suckers are really trying to connect to the boy's head. Here's just a couple of clips of the simulation itself. And for us, it was very important that the octopus never felt it was in control of the boy's head. It would be very weird if he was possessed by an octopus. So yeah, that was a main target for us. And just to give an insight on timings, around 100 frames were on 15 minutes simulation time at 4 substeps. So we were quite happy with the results there. So next stage and last for the octopus is the wrap and export, and I'm keeping it quite brief. It's split into 3 stages. The first one, very simple. We have a wrap, an inblend, so it's a point deform and just bringing back the animation itself. The second was a global lift. So this is where the relationship between us and animation came in. How do we know how much of a gap there is for the groom space? Animation struggled a lot to understand how much to give us, and we didn't want to go back to them, asking for more or less. So we took it upon ourselves to dictate how much volume we wanted to give. So right after the simulation that was always on the boy's head, we would lift the percentage and then blend back in the contact points of the tentacle tips to preserve that occlusion that we needed. Right after that, there is one more step, which is the clear coat. So the clear coat was a whole thing that began halfway through the show and never left us. We tried to achieve a wetness look on top of the skin of the octopus through shading, but we were not really able to achieve the results we wanted. So we came up with the idea of actually having an asset, a geometry, double-sided geometry. How we made it is basically through a ZBrush displacement that we use as a target. We extruded and duplicated our skin layer and basically raycasted on top through also some VDB operations. And as you can see, it's really thin. I think probably 0.5 millimeter even. And what we had done there was effectively have a water layer on top. which then we pass back to modeling just to help us out with the topology around the eye socket. But after that, we had to wrap it. So once we started wrapping it, we saw an issue on the eye rotation. It would drag the polygons with it. So our solution to this was effectively another simulation. We only isolated the part of interest around the eye, and we made the cloth sim. So we pinned all the borders. We added a very low friction and low rest length, but a high stretch stiffness. So it would really act as a very tense piece of cloth that would try and stay where it is, so that the rotations of the eye underneath wouldn't influence too much the effect of it. Once we were happy, we would simply wrap that back onto the quad mesh and blend it in and export it. So here there is a little preview of, this is a WIP render, of what it looks like with and without. So it really gave us a beneficial look to it.
This was a key moment in the project where we're not able to crack the look using just shaders, and you might be wondering why we just didn't use the clear coat layer that exists in so many shaders. We were just not able to achieve the look that we were after. And this was a thing that we tried late in the project, made it very difficult for Andrea to simulate and make sure that there are no intersections in this mesh. But it really helped the look of the character. At some point, even Disney got on board and they were like, "Yes, this is whatever you guys have done. It's working really, really nicely." And this is a very thin kind of, or a tightrope to be walking across, because you don't want it to look slimy, and you don't want it to look like it doesn't have character. So this was a key moment in the project where we were like, yes, we like this look and let's continue.
Funny enough, the painful side was I had to run this simulation about 3 times per shot because we kept changing ideas, but it's fine.
Just happens. One thing I want to say is Andrea is a bit of a octopus specialist. And you might see that in the presentation. It's not the first octopus that you've done.
It is not.
They keep, wherever they are, a CG octopus will find Andrea. The first one was for the boys, where...
Season 3, yes.
Yeah.
Been eaten alive, so if you're a bit squeamish, it's not great to look at. But
there are more out there that are making their way towards Andrea, and some he has on his plate already.
Yeah. What can I say? Cool. So, next up is grooms. The octopus was a challenge already, and we had about 5 grooms to work with as well, from being a dry groom, a wet one, a under the hat, a Christmas hat, and a Mickey Mouse hat groom. When we began our discussions with clients on what we would prefer as a haircut, we showed our preference for short grooms. Of course, it would be simpler for us to work with them. And guess what? We got the longest possible one that was available. So, yeah, but who doesn't love a challenge every once in a while? So, on that note, we had concerns about interaction on long hair. But thanks to the director, Taika Waititi, we moved away from having the tentacles moving too much, again, to that conversation of not having the octopus in control of the boy. So that really, really helped us out at the end. So the hair setup. This is the default layout that we have from the build level, prep, sim, and export. But once we go into shot, things got a bit messier. We kept finding things that we need to add along the way, and it just got out of hand. So our first stage will be simply getting our guides from the groom and wrapping them onto the animation itself. And once we are happy with that, we'll be checking with the octopus, and the first thing we would notice is there is a lot of intersections. So this is where all the work was focused at. Once we were done with all this process, we would actually repeat the pre-roll stage. We wouldn't be using the one made from our previous stage. The reasons for that was simply to allow the artists to be extremely flexible if they wanted to redo anything without having to go back to the octopus simulation. And the same goes for lifting. So we are applying the lift that we decided earlier, post-cache, to allow, again, the fact of not having to recache anything. Now, it will still intersect, of course. And more so, we are picking it out, increasing the intersection. But we also apply, for collision only, a push out. So we create enough of a gap for the hair root simulation to exist and not really explode. Once we're happy with that, we'll be moving on to setting up all our properties for the groom, starting from some clusters or clumps, hair lengths of different types, and through VEX, we are initializing all the attributes that we need for each section, starting from pin, glue, band stiffness, and so on. Each of these constraints was controllable on its own per section. And as you can see in here, I'm just looping through a few of them. And thanks to the hair length as well, we were able to have one constraint behave for multiple pieces because we are multiplying their strengths by the length. So shortest will be softer, longer will be stiffer. Right before sim, again to the topic of optimization, we are blasting away anything that is not needed for the shot. It is a bit of a manual at times, but it was fine for us. And then we enter our simulation stage. So what we're doing here, we're actually scaling up the asset twice. And the reason being was for collision detection. It was struggling a bit on the tentacle tips being too small. The simulation itself is fairly simple. It's a hair setup, so hair constraints with a couple of glues to preserve the volumetric shape of the hair, and a couple of touch constraints for the fringe to not fall in front of the boy's face. After the sim, we have a few post fixes I'm not covering really, but there are again a bit of dirty hacks like soft transforms or guide deform, point deforms. It all depends on the necessity of the shot. Once we were happy with the overall simulation, we would just cache that out. But this shot has an exception because we had a late node on a couple of hairs. So we just split them out, address the node, and blend them back in. Once we were happy, we would simply copy all that data to the original asset and publish it to the next department. So I'm just showing here two images with and without postfixes. Now, we wanted initially to do all this in simulation, but the cost of it was too high for the time span we had. So we decided to simply rely on postfixes, which are fast and cheap and reliable overall. To give an insight on timings as well, over 100 frames, we're talking about half an hour simulation time at the 3 substeps and 500 constraints iteration. And it keeps getting more interesting. So, as if it wasn't hard enough having an octopus on a boy's head interact with hair, we also had to add a hat on top, interacting with both. So, Mickey hat. The simulation, well, this is the setup. We have our prep stage, our simulation, and export stage. It's always the same layout across projects. Again, we store all the things we need in terms of attributes, and we're doing our pre-roll to preserve the original shape of Mickey. We cache that out by creating our remesh geometry, and then simply are just visualizing our colliders and starting directly with our attributes once again. In this case, the attributes we are using are things such as tangent to preserve the orientation of the hat at the front, compression stiffness or pin, and stretch values as well. There you go. We also had a feature, if needed, that we could pin the hat to the tentacle in case he was being lifted to try and come out of it. We didn't use it for this shot specifically. We are also wrapping our pompons onto the remesh geometry to follow along, and it was just to optimize them. And then we prep our colliders, the boy and the octopus, as well as a few extra geo to cover the gap between the ear and the side of the head. Once we're happy with all that, we are entering our simulation, which is nothing but a cloth sim. So the workflow here is pretty basic. We have a Cloth constraints with a couple of pin values that are all being multiplied by the masks that we generated. A stitch constraints to preserve the folded section to not flap over. Some shape match for the pom-pom volume, and a glue. Once we cast that out and simulated, we were not really happy with the results all the time. But this is not a render mesh, this was just a target for us, so it was a bit more forgiving. Nonetheless, we wanted to improve the look, and once again we entered postfixes. We love to do that. So one thing we could do was actually using the sculpt node, which is a great addition to the latest Houdinis, and add bulges or dents, which would really allow us to create a realistic look of the hat. And then we had a simulation of the pompons, which I'm not covering, but it's very, very, very nice and simple. What we could do, although, is round them based on camera view. So we were able to either shrink the base with a slider or enter with a paint attribute where we wanted to round up the shapes to make it more pleasant from the camera itself. The last stage would be wrapping, so get our quad mesh onto the simulation with point deforms. And once again, guess what? Postfixes. This was a late node, so we did this during the delivery stage. So we just did it at the bottom to avoid any issue. And then we wrapped and published that to the next department. So all of these things were rendered in Houdini, and thanks to some great work that Amaan put in, we were able to really cut down times in terms of rendering. The grooms that we had didn't need to be cached, so all we were actually giving lighting was guides, which were very light in Alembic. And the deformation stage would happen at render time, which allowed us to keep the data footprint very low. Also being on the cloud, that helps. And it was really fast to the first time pixel, also because it was done in C++. And yeah.
Yeah, this was, when we first set out, we were taking a lot of the work that would be done in Groom and then would go into shot lighting for lighters or Lookdev. And so a lot of the Groom attributes would be live. There would be some unpacking going on, and then as soon as you unpack, we all know, things become incredibly memory hungry. Let's just say that. So just unpacking Mickey's hat there was taking up 45 gigabytes of RAM.
Yeah, I think it was over 100 million points, just the Groom itself. So.
Yeah, so the Groom is done to as things go, you prepare a Groom for all possible scenarios, and then it becomes too heavy, and then things slow down in Houdini. So for example, when you're doing shot rendering, time to first pixel is 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and I've done shot lighting. I never want to work like that. So at some point, I just started coding and building algorithms, and then the conversation between me and Andrea would be, Andrea, what attribute are you giving me and in which class? And he would go, this attribute, this class. Okay. So we brought down 3 to 4 minutes down to 20 seconds based on how we design our algorithms, based on internal conversations around how do we structure ourselves. And so there is a massive boost in terms of creative productivity because you don't have to wait that amount of time while things are unpacking, reassembling. It's just much quicker for us to be working like that. So today, all fur, short hair, long hair, feathers, they're all deformed at render time. We get a lot of efficiency from that. And no more caching on disk, except, like you're saying, the guides.
And lighting can actually do lighting rather than wait for caches.
Yeah.
Cool. So this brings us to the end of the presentation. But before we wrap up, there is a couple more things that we can take a look. One of them being the actual 4-minute short movie.
Travel all around the world.
How can one man in one night visit all the children of the world?
Thank you. So before we wrap up, I thought it would be nice to just show how many recognition the project had over the last few months. Starting from VES, we attended Los Angeles last January for 3 nominations. We didn't win, but it was amazing to be there in the first place. We had many also in AICP's nominations between animation, VFX, CGI, design, and compositing. Shots America, animation, and we just recently got awarded the Best Advert of the Year with them in VFX. And last but not least, the Webby Award, we won the animation category. And of course, a big thank you goes to all the people that worked on the project over the 6 months of its lifespan back home, starting from all the artists to technology, pipeline, and everyone else involved. It wouldn't have been possible really without the massive effort that everyone put in over those months. So with that said, thank you for being here. I guess we can start with the questions.
So good, so good. Any questions? Don't be shy. There you go.
At least we have one.
Great presentation, guys.
Thank you.
I was just wondering what you rendered in, and for the CFX deformer, is it based on the USD procedural at all?
So we render in Arnold. We're not in the world of USD, not yet. So yeah, all the deformation happens in the world of Arnold. Yep.
So that extra geo that you added for the clear coat, like to emulate the clear coat, how did you manage the render times on that? Because I could expect that it would almost be like a full refraction render, like when you add that on top. Like, how did you manage that?
So the shader network underneath was already very complex, and then you add refraction on top. Yes, you're right. It does add to the render time. What we did was we started using the cache node inside Arnold, so that caches a lot of the shading networks per sample behind that particular shader, which saved tons of time in terms of rendering. And obviously we don't do we limit the number of bounces. We may not do total internal refraction, so we don't simulate refraction as scientifically as possible. They're always like approximations.
Yeah, thank you. I love the technique. It's really cool.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I was wondering, how did you tackle the shot where the octopus is like pulling on the eye of the boy? Because I was really wondering, since you had the whole sculpt set up, did you have to adjust anything for that shot in particular?
Yeah, we did a few takes on it. Mostly it was to get the right timing in the shot itself. So we had a bit of support from animation itself to get the first behavior and timing correct. And then we would just work against our roto animation that was really done bespoke into it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other people? Questions? Yeah.
Hi there. Thanks for the whole presentation. I was just curious about if you could expand a little bit on like the sort of specific shading that you have to do, like the C++ part of things, to just make sure that you didn't have to cache the hair and you just basically had all the deformations in render time to just lower all the like sort of rendering first pixel kind of thing.
Yes, so well, basically we load in the groom cache and the guide cache if we're doing deforming. We will pull in everything that we can. Loading off our disk is really fast because we're in AWS. Our network speeds are amazingly fast, so we're not worried about loading gigabytes of data. So they load in pretty quickly, and then the algorithms that go there are more aligned along how can we do as much work as possible on as many cores as possible. So there is a lot of parallelism there. Also, we don't ingest everything, and there are pruning options there. So for like LOD options, we will load in the full groom, but we may not necessarily render the full groom. So there's a slider there, like you can reduce the curve count. And actually, sometimes for distant shots, you can't see it. Sometimes we use Bezier curves, for example. They take 3 times less memory than Catmull-Clark curves because they'll hold less information, so there is an approximation there. So we kind of go with like, what's the data footprint? How do we get as much detail in there? Because we get asked to put in tons and tons of details. There's so much like per point attributes come in upstream. We need to make sure that we're really, very, very prudent in the way that we're ingesting the data that's coming in. Sometimes we're successful and other times we're not. And so therefore, at render time, we make certain decisions that make it really fast. And then the deformation part of it, a lot of stuff had to be rebuilt, which is I had to do like closest line approximations, like distance algorithms. I think at some point I had to do smooth shading approximations, which was something that was a problem solved in the 1970s. But then you go into C++ and you go, oh, this has not been, I've unsolved it. So there were many issues that came up, but we resolved all of them. We were having issues with when the underlying skin stretches, there's a lot of shearing that would show up in rotations in groom. How do you handle that? We've gone through all of that. So right now, like I haven't touched the code for it.
It's been a while.
Yeah, no one's broken it, and
we broke it many times.
I do run an occasional challenge. Hey guys, no one's broken this for a few months now. So yeah, it's production ready. It's been in like multiple projects, all of Sonic 3, the work we did, all the Groom hair commercials, Feathers, the Sylvester Stallone Eagle. Yeah, all of it runs through that.
I just want to get a follow-up just for Andrea about the sort of setups that you just showed up about, like sliders and stuff to control past animation, like how everything sort of interacts and stuff. That basically passes a lot of the final animation polishing into the CFX team, doesn't it, in this case?
So animation would do the whole behavior themselves. Our sliders were mostly just to either lift the octopus from the head or dictate the strength of the properties for simulation. So effectively, we would be adding an extra layer of feeling on top of what animation does itself.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Question from side effects.
Yeah, now the hard questions come in. Here we
Tell
go.
us everything, Kai.
Nothing too technical, actually. When you were showing like the core surface, I was wondering, was the inside of the tentacles like fully constrained to the animation, or did you allow them to like veer off a little bit?
So they were following pretty much 90+% to it, but they were able to deviate from, as in the internal core attached to it was being able to be squashed. Like the shot on the glass, half of it was a core effectively inside, but we were able to compress it anyway.
So you're constraining to the animation rather than like just matching.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool. Really awesome work.
Thank you.
High praise indeed. Any other questions? Excellent. Well, great work, guys. Really.
Thanks so
for
much.
sharing that.
Thank you.